In this video, we will review the Response to Intervention RTI for SLD Determination Fidelity tool and process for sites to apply to use RTI methodology to identify specific learning disability. My name is Bryn Rice, an educational consultant from PaTTAN East. I am joined today by my colleagues Lydia Amy from PaTTAN West and Erica Caruter from PaTTAN Central. Today, we're going to review the process for RTI for SLD application, review the RTI for SLD Determination Fidelity tool and the supporting documentation, and we'll also describe steps needed to develop an action plan. When a site is using this tool to apply RTI for identifying specific learning disabilities, the local education agency must involve a representative from a local intermediate unit or PaTTAN in their formal review process. The completed tool is submitted to Shannon I, BSE advisor for formal approval. The BSE will then notify the LEA regarding their status as either approved, disapproved, or in need of revision. Once approved, the LEA team is required to outline use for RTI for SLD determination in the school district comprehensive special education plan or the charter school annual report. LEAs are encouraged to continue to use this tool for internal review to ensure all elements remain in place. A cross-disciplinary team from the LEA completes this tool collaboratively through discussing each component. The team will come to a consensus and rate each item on a scale of 0, not implemented, 1, somewhat implemented, or 2, fully implemented by reviewing recommended artifacts. Teams are encouraged to add notes for each component in order to identify areas of improvement to build an action plan. There are 8 components that the LEA team must review and rate. We will now review each component. The first component is Pennsylvania Standards Aligned High Quality Core Instruction. In this component, the LEA team evaluates core instruction to ensure it is high quality, aligned to standards, and implemented with fidelity. On this tool, you'll see 3 columns. The first column is the guided discussion, where are the overall concepts that will be described in each item, evidence that can happen through discussion, and then a place for the team to input their ratings. In the first item, the LEA team will explore the elements of core instruction, including the use of differentiation and universal design for learning to meet the diverse needs of all learners, as well as how students are actively engaged in instruction. Next, the discussion will center on how teachers check for understanding and provide corrective feedback for students. This can include informal or formative assessment techniques such as questioning, discussion, and peer self-assessments. Evidence for this item can be obtained through observations of lessons during administrator walkthroughs, teachers' lessons designs, or other classroom observational data. In the third item, the LEA team will examine how fidelity of core instruction is monitored and how educators receive feedback in order to make adjustments to instruction. This can be accomplished through formal walkthroughs, use of fidelity checklists, or coaching data. The fourth item focuses on LEAs utilizing grade-level teams to identify and track grade-level goals based upon universal screening data, and ensuring there's a range of evidence-based academic, behavioral, and SEL strategies to implement to improve student performance and outcomes. Additionally, the LEA team will address the professional development opportunities available to educators to strengthen core instruction. Several resources and links are listed to provide additional information on these topics. Please know that there have been updates to the PaTTAN website, so the links have been adjusted and are available for you in this slide deck. Please view www.pattan.net to view the new PaTTAN website. Recommended artifacts to provide evidence for the items are provided after each component. For PA standards aligned high quality core instruction, LEA teams may wish to include an example of grade level lesson that's aligned with the standards and provides opportunities for differentiation and taking into account the needs of all learners, a copy of the building schedule to show the dedicated time to core instruction, data meeting protocols of grade level team meetings, and completed fidelity checklists for core instruction. At the end of this table, there's a section for the site to record a summary of their discussion in regards to high-quality core instruction. This can include areas of strength, as well as areas to improve upon, as an explanation for the team's ratings for this component. Universal screening is a fundamental element of MTSS. Let's delve into the key elements of universal screening that are crucial for implementing MTSS with fidelity. The LEA team will identify what tool is used for universal screening, its frequency of administration, and its intended purpose. It's important to discuss the reliability and validity of the chosen tool, and several links are provided for the team to evaluate the efficacy of various commercially available options. Next, the team should consider whether the administration and scoring of the screener is standardized, adhering to the established guidelines. This includes discussions on how educators are trained in both administering and scoring the screening tool to ensure consistency and accuracy. In the third item, the LEA team will discuss how universal screening data is utilized to inform core instruction and identify students who may require Tier 2 or Tier 3 support. There are several examples to detail how schools may utilize this universal screening data. To support evidence of effective universal screening, the following artifacts are recommended: a schedule for universal screening and benchmarking, procedures indicating how universal screening data is utilized, including a decision-making tree or flowchart to indicate which students will be identified in need of intervention and matching interventions to their skill needs. Documentation or evidence of professional development provided to educators on administering and scoring the universal screener, and interpretation of student performance and data. In the summary section, the LEA team may record details about their universal screener, its administration schedule, and data interpretation procedures. This will help provide a clear rationale for the ratings of this component.
MTSS fosters collaboration and collective responsibility for the success of all students across a school community. Therefore, shared ownership is another critical component when an LEA is considering the use of RTI for SLD determination. Let's take a closer look at what an LEA will want to consider when evaluating their MTSS framework for use of RTI for SLD determination. When addressing the first item in this section, the LEA team will review the various layers of teaming established to support a high-quality framework across all tiers. This includes evidence of different teams serving specific functions, such as a core building team focused on systems level needs, grade level teams assessing student growth in response to core instruction, and an advanced tier team that addresses the needs of individual students who are not responding adequately to intensive support. Within this Fidelity tool, the LEA team can access links to relevant presentations for review during discussions. Next, the LEA team will evaluate how the roles and responsibilities of current personnel have shifted to support MTSS implementation across all tiers. Ensuring sufficient staffing is crucial for the effective implementation of evidence-based practices within the MTSS framework. To achieve this, teams must often leverage the expertise of existing staff and expand roles beyond traditional duties. For example, speech-language pathologists might take on teacher coaching in language development. School psychologists may serve as data analysts on problem-solving teams, and special education teachers and reading specialists might collaborate more often to support all students. The Fidelity tool offers recommended artifacts the LEA team might produce to demonstrate shared ownership and effective teaming. For example, a core team action plan with short and long-term action steps aligned to student data, evidence of family involvement, highlighting the role of parents and guardians within the various teams, inclusion of the MTSS framework in the LEA's strategic plan, or fidelity of implementation or weekly coaching priorities outlined in schedules by an advanced tier provider. Data-based decision-making is another fundamental aspect of the MTSS framework and the use of RTI for SLD determination. A large number of factors related to the use of data must be taken into account when an LEA team uses the Fidelity tool to evaluate MTSS implementation. Now we'll take a closer look at these discussion items. When addressing this section, the LEA team should consider how systems or tools facilitate user-friendly access to student and classroom performance data, along with interpretive reports. Examples of data systems include an early warning system, Spring Math, FastBridge, and Acadience, among many others. Additionally, the LEA team must consider how the school schedules supports ongoing opportunities for data examination. This could involve a school calendar that specifies dedicated time for various teams to meet for data analysis and ongoing problem solving. The LEA team will also discuss their processes for evaluating the effectiveness of core instruction as well as supplemental interventions. During discussions, the LEA team should consider whether the team consistently examines the median performance in the classroom from benchmark to benchmark to assess the health of core instruction. Additionally, the LEA team should reflect upon how they determine if students receiving supplemental intervention are adequately responding, such as whether 75% of students receiving Tier 2 or Tier 3 supports are responding with above typical or well above typical growth. This Fidelity tool encourages LEA teams to review the evidence-based practices currently implemented to support students who demonstrate inadequate growth and achievement. It's important to consider disaggregated subgroup data during this review. For example, the LEA team will discuss how all students, including those with disabilities, have equitable access to high-quality core instruction in the least restrictive environment. They will want to provide confirmation that teams gather and interpret reliable growth data to guide the support being offered and demonstrate that root causes have been matched with effective evidence-based practices. Efficacy of these practices should be supported through progress monitoring data. Verifying instructional alignment and instructional matching across tiers should also be considered when using this Fidelity tool. The LEA team will provide evidence through discussion that team members are skilled in evidence-based practices and intensification strategies. The LEA team will consider the diagnostic tools used to pinpoint root causes of learning challenges to ensure instructional matching. For example, using an if-then system for decision-making. The LEA team will discuss whether educators regularly consider fidelity of implementation of evidence-based practices. This can be accomplished by assessing student response to interventions and discussing whether the team follows a continuous problem-solving process to refine instruction and intervention. Continuing on with the review of their database decision-making processes, the LEA team must also review how teams respond if a student is not making adequate growth. This includes indicating that core instruction and interventions have been implemented with fidelity, as evidenced by academically similar peers showing above typical growth demonstrating that the team has consistently adjusted and intensified instruction based on data, and indicating the use of additional assessments that verified minimal growth for the target student despite interventions. Evidence-based practices should be specifically confirmed during this process. For example, the LEA team can verify their use of evidence-based practices through research studies and accredited technical assistance centers. Finally, the database decision-making component of the RTI for SLD Fidelity tool should prompt teams to review professional learning opportunities that have focused on the use of data analysis to inform instruction and intervention. The PaTTAN website offers information regarding evidence-based practices, resources, and a variety of training events. Several specific artifacts are suggested for the LEA team to demonstrate effective database decision-making. For example, the LEA team can describe their method for documenting RTI for students who are receiving advanced tier supports. An analysis of student growth percentiles could be reviewed to show the effectiveness of core instruction and supplemental intervention, including subgroup performance, and documentation of a continuum of formal and informal formative assessments used across all students, some students, and a few students. The responsiveness to intervention component of MTSS is another critical factor that LEAs must consider when reviewing their MTSS framework for use of RTI and SLD determination. Let's review the discussion points that LEAs will want to consider when using this tool. During discussions, teams should examine how instruction and interventions within tiers 2 and 3 progressively increase in duration, frequency, and intensity. This review might include factors such as the time allocated for each tier, teacher-to-student ratio, amount of family engagement, level of customization, and the method for calculating RTI. The LEA team will also want to consider how they assess the health and fidelity of implementation across all tiers. Discussions may include reviewing specific reports within data systems that track student growth and achievement over time, utilizing fidelity measures or checks, and analyzing systems level improvements. For example, this may include examining whether the number of students needing the most intensive supports has decreased, and whether the percentage of students responding adequately to supplemental interventions has increased over time. How adequate and inadequate responses to intervention are defined should also be considered. Through discussion, the LEA team will ask, do decision-making protocols account for contextual factors? Are these protocols applied consistently across time, settings, and individuals? And do these protocols occur with a dynamic team-based process? Teams should reference professional learning in this area and provide specific resources. Next, the LEA team will consider who is designated to provide the most intensive supports and services, and the rationale behind these designations. The LEA team should ensure that the most experienced and skilled practitioners are assigned to work with students presenting high levels of risk. When reviewing these factors under the responsiveness to intervention component, the LEA team should address all the above criteria and make reference to evidence-based practices identified through nationally recognized clearinghouses, such as the National Center for Intervention, the Center on MTSS, the IRIS Center, and What Works Clearinghouse. This tool offers suggestions for artifacts that LEAs might pull when reviewing the responsiveness to intervention component. For example, an anonymous graph of individual student data, including an aim line and a trend line, along with an interpretation of the student's RTI, whether adequate or inadequate, and an explanation of that determination. An analysis of student growth percentiles, rate of improvement, or mastery measurement, which are commonly used RTI methodologies to evaluate the effectiveness of core instruction and supplemental interventions for all students. Also include an analysis of RTI for a student of interest, comparing progress to that of the student's academically similar peers who have received Tier 3 supports. Or evidence of a fidelity tool of tiered supports and services demonstrated through treatment integrity and fidelity measures.
Next, let's talk about how family engagement can play a role in SLD or RTI for SLD determination. Let's review this component of meaningful family engagement in more depth and think about how that looks, as well as artifacts we may gather to support this important collaboration. First, let's consider how families are empowered to participate in meetings related to the effectiveness of tiered supports for their children and how families who speak another language may be supported. Consider these items evidenced through discussion. Does your LEA have example documentation of MTSS in family-friendly language that is shared on the website, at parent-teacher conferences, or through other avenues? Does your LEA put examples of evidence-based strategies families can use at home to support their child and make those readily accessible? How does your LEA ensure any materials are translated for families who are multilingual? Finally, how are resources made accessible for any family members who may have hearing or visual disabilities? There are a number of resources that you can find, evidence through discussion here. Next, let's think about how families, how does your LEA share student progress with families with regard to students who are at risk and receiving intervention? Are families invited and included in quarterly progress meetings to review supports provided, as well as the child's instructional response and continued planning for supports? There are some suggested artifacts that your LEA team may consider to provide evidence of family engagement. These might be things such as a sample report, redacted of any identifying information, to help families understand how their child is performing and responding to intervention. Perhaps you have a brochure for families explaining your LEA's MTSS model. And then you can generate a summary of what is in place and maybe what steps need to be taken to enhance family engagement. Next, let's talk about how the use of RTI methodology to identify SLD may look in practice. Let's start with some consideration of local guidelines that LEAs need to have in place to determine if a student's response to instruction, core and supplemental, is inadequate. So first, let's think about the local guidelines that your LEA team uses to determine if a child's response to instruction and intervention is adequate or inadequate. So things that we may consider. First, what are those local guidelines that we may look at? We can consider looking at growth rates as a collective for Tier 1. Are most students displaying typical or above typical growth on those assessments administered to all? Are 80% or more of students in your LEA meeting benchmarks in literacy, math, written expression? For those students who are receiving Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports in addition to Tier 1, are a high percentage, 75 to 80% of those students, making above typical progress in response to those evidence-based interventions. You may also wish to consider professional development and coaching supports provided to your LEA team around the response to instruction and intervention. Let's think about what measures and methods are used to rule out other disabilities. For example, how is your LEA ruling out disabilities such as intellectual disability or emotional disturbance, as well as other factors such as limited English proficiency on student learning and growth, as well as other conditions? So here your LEA team could think about what measures are routinely used. For example, are hearing and vision screening results reviewed to ensure lack of response is not due to a visual or hearing impairment? Have we reviewed the family's home language survey to rule out lack of English proficiency? The SLD guidelines will provide a complete picture of all rollouts. Additionally, this is an area where your school psychologist can be abundantly helpful. As we move on, when we think about the third item, our team wants to consider the observation process for students suspected of having an SLD as part of the multidisciplinary evaluation process. So here is where LEA teams can consider their observation processes for students who are suspected of having an SLD. Please note students must be observed in the area where they are experiencing difficulty. For example, if the concern is in the area of mathematics calculation, the student should be observed during math instruction and math intervention time. You can see the different Pennsylvania guidelines that help govern observation requirements. Additionally, we also want to consider instructional, environmental, and curricular factors that may be impacting learning during the observation. Your LEA team should consider have observational data help inform the instruction and intervention process across the tiers. As we consider the fourth item, we are going to look at the student's academic level. How is your LEA team assessing and determining what the student's current academic level is? First, it's important to consider technically adequate measures when we are evaluating a child's level of academic performance. For example, we may need to look at not only progress monitoring data from curriculum-based measure over time on his skill or skills, but also supplement our assessment with a norm reference measure of achievement on a broad composite to look at the overall level in that specific area of achievement. It is also important to consider the student's academic level at the end of an intervention period. That end data point is more important than the slope or amount of change because it contains the information of growth within that end point. As we move to the fifth area, we want to think about those procedures used to rule out lack of instruction as the reason for the student's academic concerns. Part of this rule out includes assessment of the fidelity of core instruction and supplemental interventions. So as an LEA team, we want to consider how the student's performance level relates to that of their peers and any current discrepancy between the student and peer performance. How do we appraise the quality of curriculum and instruction, as well as consistent access to high quality instruction and intervention, as evidenced by repeated assessment? We also want to consider, has the student been present for a majority of instructional opportunities? Finally, we want to think about what are those procedures used to inform families of the results of repeated assessments of their students' academic skills. So here is where the team wants to consider family engagement efforts again. Are we ensuring that families have the opportunity to meet with the school team and serve in a role as partners with their child's learning? Has the LEA team provided information about the child's performance on progress monitoring measures to families along the way? As we think about potential recommended artifacts with the use of RTI for SLD, as well as how do we summarize those? So, a number of artifacts can be gathered and reviewed. This might be our data analysis protocols that reflect increasing percentages of students meeting proficiency on a continuum of measures. Perhaps your LEA team's local procedures for the use of RTI for SLD determination. Perhaps an artifact such as a flow chart or an if-then decision-making framework that helps LEA teams make decisions that are equitable and informed by reliable and valid data sources and are appropriately contextualized within the LEA's current MTSS framework. Again, teams have a summary section here where they can summarize those evidence pieces as well as maybe next steps that need to be taken. And finally, as we move along, the final component on the RTI for SLD Fidelity tool is professional learning. Let's dive deeper into the importance of purposeful and planned professional development to support MTSS implementation and responsiveness to intervention. In this component, this gives your LEA team an opportunity to describe what informs professional learning opportunities and how practitioners are supported with bridging research to practice gaps. How are we applying learning within the context of our school system? So your LEA team should consider why professional learning was mobilized for a group of practitioners. What informed that decision? And what was the outcome? For example, maybe we have our core MTSS team reviewed our PVOS quintile reports, which provides a distribution of levels of achievement and growth for sixth grade students across our LEA. And maybe we found it through that evaluation that a majority of students were realizing below typical growth during their sixth grade year for literacy. Professional learning through systemic supports provided by PaTTAN was accessed to learn about evidence-based instructional practices and interventions in literacy. The outcome was that enhanced instructional and intervention practices resulted in improved student growth as evidenced by PVOS quintile data and other sources of formal and informal formative data. So we want to consider what are those, how was professional learning designed based upon our data? Why was that mobilized? Is it continuously informed by district, school, grade, and student level data? And does professional learning provide regular opportunities to embed those strategies and skills learned in professional learning in job embedded opportunities? So we have a number of recommended artifacts that teams may consider from professional learning. Perhaps that is part of your LEA's professional learning plan. Perhaps that may be evidenced by a number of certificates provided as attendance at professional learning opportunities. And in the artifacts, your team can consider what do we have in place and maybe what are those areas that we need for additional growth. So that brings our RTI for SLD Fidelity tool to a close. We want to offer you a minute to reflect on where your LEA team's current stage of implementation is with regard to the use of RTI methodology within a multi-tiered system of supports to identify specific learning disability. Is your LEA team currently exploring MTSS? You're thinking maybe this is something that we should do. You're starting to look at some data and recognize this is something that we need to put in place at our LEA. Maybe you're initially installing different components of a multi-tiered system of supports. Perhaps your team is initially implementing and you need to make some adjustments. Or perhaps your team is at full implementation and you're starting to be innovative with your journey and ready to apply for RTI for SLD. So we encourage you to think about what might your LEA's next steps be, and think about also, we're going to highlight where your LEA team can find support. So there are opportunities to request support around multi-tiered systems of supports, as well as moving toward the use of response to intervention methodology to identify specific learning disability. You can go to the www.pattan.net site, and there, right on the landing page, you're able to find an opportunity to request customized professional development and technical assistance. You can click there to watch short videos and learn more about the different types of training, technical assistance, and systemic supports that are provided to LEAs within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Additionally, your local intermediate unit provides support around the use of multi-tiered systems of support and the use of RTI methodology to identify specific learning disability. There, you can check out www.paiu.org to find your local intermediate unit and request supports from them. We would like to thank you for joining this session. Please feel free to reach out to our team if we can be of assistance.